It's called Unbelievable Faith. And it's Elijah and Elisha confront unbelief. And that's actually a pretty good, it's a good name because it's in an unbelieving world that Elijah and Elisha kind of come into it, and they do some pretty unbelievable things in this time that we're going to talk about. And so my first question is, does everyone know who Elijah and Elisha is? Ooh, it's quiet. It's quiet. You're like, I think I've heard of him. Oh. Coley's been sick for a week. Like that's, all right, so we'll see. It's a bad week for me to get sick. But that's kind of what happens sometimes. So Elijah and Elisha. So we're not too sure on Elijah or Elisha there. Like that's perhaps you heard of them. Like perhaps the kid next door who is always hitting balls into your yard and stuff like that. Like his name's Elijah or something like that. Maybe. I don't know. Like why are they a big deal? Like who are these guys and why is there an entire sermon series about them? Well, they are pretty important. They are pretty important. I have a photograph of the two of them there. It's like okay, so who are these people? They're very important. Like back in Jesus' day, they're extremely important. Remember what it said before Jesus came, that one was going to come like Elijah before Jesus, right? That was John the Baptist. Remember that? So one like Elijah was going to come before. That was him. But the story about Jesus that we just read was that, as we'll see here in a little bit, the Spirit of God tells Elijah to go into the wilderness. The same thing happens with Jesus there, that Jesus goes out in the wilderness. Same thing happens with Moses, that he goes out in the wilderness. Continuing on in the story of Jesus, we get to the transfiguration, kind of the midway point where Jesus is going into Jerusalem, and he goes with his disciples onto the top of this mountain, and he's transfigured before them. And basically that means he's all becomes bright and shiny before him, and God said, "This is my son," and all those things. And two people show up on either side of him. One of them is Moses, and the other one is Elijah, right? So Elijah's playing big prominent here. Now, if you have good Jewish friends, every year for thousands of years that they have celebrated the Passover meal, they leave an empty chair in an empty place setting. For who? Elijah, right? Like Elijah is everywhere, and he plays in specifically into the stories that we know and love so much and around us, yet we really don't know a whole lot about these guys. You know why? Stories are weird, and they don't make sense, and we don't know often what to do with them. Also kind of the classic church readings, when you have you go to the other ones and they follow the calendar and all of that, they don't really hit the stories about Elijah and Elisha too much. Do you know why? Because the stories are weird and don't make a whole lot of sense, and they're hard to preach on. So what do? I go, let's do a sermon series on it. I like pain, right? But they're very interesting stories, and so this sermon is going to be a little different than most. It's going to feel more a little lecture-y and all of that stuff, because you need to set up. You need to walk into the world of Elijah and Elisha to understand what's going on. So their world is written down in 1st and 2nd Kings. All right, in that book, 1st and 2nd Kings in the Old Testament, it's there. And to get us to where we are, you got to remember that back at the beginning of 1st and 2nd Samuel, the people of God cried out like, "Oh, we want to be big and powerful like all the other nations in the world. We want to be so big and important that we want a king like they have." And God's like, "Are you sure?" And they're like, "Yeah, we want a king." And he's like, "All right." And so he gives them Saul. Saul, not the best king. But after that, we get King David. And King David is a man after God's own heart. David is kind of the quintessential king. In fact, Jesus comes in through the line of David, right? So David is good, but David's got his problems. Bathsheba is one of them, right? Not the best look, right? Like all that. The other one, and this one is kind of forgotten about and not really talked about, but you know, David was supposed to build the temple in Jerusalem, but do you know why he wasn't able to build the temple in Jerusalem? God stopped him. Do you know why? It's because David was all about war. It's all about warfare. And God's like, no, you're not going to build the temple. Like and so we often kind of forget about that because it's kind of convenient for us. I think we should look at that as Christians. And so then after David dies, and when David dies, the kingdom is unified. It's great. He's got a son named Solomon, and Solomon takes over. And we all know Solomon. Solomon is this incredible guy who God asks him, I'll give you anything. And he's like, oh, I want wisdom. That's it. And he shows all this amazing wisdom, and God blesses him with all these things. And then at least the story I grew up about Solomon was doing great, but he had all those pesky wives. And then the lesson that I got growing up is you better watch out for the ladies, fellas, because you can have all the wisdom in the world and then they'll just take you down, right? Like that. That's kind of the sense of it. But the problem is that's not really true. That's not really true. That's not what's going on. Yeah, he had a ton of wives, and that was kind of his downfall. But it's not the wives, ladies. It wasn't you. Maybe? I don't know. I'm not going to commit. But what it actually was is what I appreciate the laugh. What it actually was is what the wives represented. You see, Solomon, he was looking at what he was doing, and in all of his wisdom, he goes, we need to become better. We need to become more powerful. We need to become bigger and greater. We need all of this to go over. And so in order to do that, we need to create embargoes and treaties and trade deals and all those things. It's still things politics is all about today, right? And he does all those things. And you know what happens if you enter into a treaty or something like that with another kingdom back in the day? In order to solidify it, they would do it with a marriage. What did all those wives mean? It meant that all of those were all represented treaties and embargoes and trade deals and all those things, all the super fun parts of politics, right? That's what all that represented. And what's another thing too is one of the big, as Solomon was building the temple, he started running out of money. And as he was running out of money, he's like, oh man, we need to really cut costs here. And so he decided to cut costs by having cheap labor. Our English Bibles clean up the language in the Bible here, but they call it indentured servants. What is that really? Slaves. So Solomon, in order to save money, begins having slaves build the temple. Now here's the problem. If you read any of the book of Deuteronomy, God basically says this: you were once slaves in Egypt and I took you out. You are to never have slaves. And it's almost impossible to read Deuteronomy without seeing that. It basically is on every page, everything. Do not have slaves, even though we read the Bible a lot of times and we're like, I don't see anything, right? It's part of our idolatry. We'll get into that in a second. But he looks over there, and what's interesting, and what this picture is trying to show, is that the way kings present Solomon at the end of his rule, he no longer looks like a Hebrew king. He looks like a pharaoh. He looks like a pharaoh. He looks like he's from Egypt. It's talking about his huge stables of Egyptian horses. It's right there in the middle of it. It's incredible. And when Solomon dies, everything hits the fan. I don't know what it is that hits the fan, but something hits the fan, right? Everything hits the fan. And suddenly the kingdom splits into two. All these different kings happen. There's the northern kingdom that's called the kingdom of Israel. The southern one is called the kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem is the capital of the kingdom of the south of Judah. All right? Samaria is made the capital of the kingdom of Israel in the north. Samaritans, Samaria. And one of the kings in Samaria, they build this huge temple to the Lord in Samaria. Maybe you can understand why the Samaritans are not liked by people in Jesus' day. All right. So they build this huge temple that matches the one in Jerusalem. And you know what they do in honor of God Yahweh in there? They put up 2 golden calves in honor to him inside that temple. That doesn't fall on deaf ears, do it? Do I have to explain golden calves to you? Remember, they walked through the Red Sea, golden calves, all that stuff. I'm not going to explain it right now if you don't get it. But it's a deep burden. They don't even explain it, but you're supposed to go, wait a second, something's wrong here. They're worshiping other things, and none of the kings on the northern side are described as being any good. They're all going after their own stuff. There's a few kings in the south that are doing all right, but mostly they're bad too. And it all gets up to the king that we're talking about today, and his name is Ahab. And 2 Kings chapter 16 describes Ahab like this. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord. This is how they describe all the kings. But it says this, more than all who were before him. Like, it's not like, all right, this person was bad, all that, but Ahab was the king of all baddies, right? Like, he's the one who came in, and he's like, I am going to be the worst ever, right? And he marries someone you probably know, Jezebel. Yeah. So it's Ahab and Jezebel. Suddenly things are connecting. You're like, oh, this is where this story is. The story of Elijah is about Ahab, Jezebel, and Elijah. It's good stuff. Get ready. And so we all meet them, and Jezebel is a Phoenician who brought great political allies with her marriage to Ahab. All right? And that's where we are. That's what has gone on. And one of the things that Jezebel has done is she and Ahab end up instituting worship of Baal, the fertility god, inside of the capital city of Samaria. All right, let's talk about other boring things for a second. I know this is a lot of history, but you got to get it in order to understand where we're going. So let's talk about Baal for a second. Baal is not how you pronounce it, all right? It's how everyone pronounces it, so you should probably keep on pronouncing it like that, but that's not how it's pronounced, all right? Everyone just gets it wrong, so that's the new pronouncement. It was when everyone gets it wrong. It's actually Baal, all right? Baal. And so if you ever looked at Baal and wonder why it's Baal, it's actually Baal, right? So let's actually talk about Elohim. Do you guys know what Elohim is and what it's from? That's the Hebrew word for God. Elohim. Im is a plural ending, right? So this is how the Hebrews said. It's like, we have one God, but they say it like this. We have one gods, right? So it's El means God, and Im is like the S at the end of it. So we have one gods is how the Hebrews defined their God. Now, that's in the Hebrew language. Arabic is extremely close to Hebrew. The way they say God is all. And the way they do a plural is ah. Did you make the connection yet? Allah. All right? So if Hebrews did it, it would be Elah. All right? But it's Elohim. And so the way the Arabic does it is Allah. I'm telling you this so you don't be scared of words. Don't be scared of Allah. It's just Arabic for God. All right? Now, they graft on it a little bit more than just God, but we kind of do that with the word God in English, right? So Allah. So now we look at Baal. Baal. Allah. You hear it? It's another word for God. Okay? This is key to understanding how they get into worshiping all these other gods, okay? So Baal is in there, and Baal or Baal is a fertility god. He's the god of the rain and the storms and all of that. And the thing is it makes sense. Think about it. If there was a god that was in charge of all the rain, you would probably pray to him when it's a little dry outside, right? It's like, listen, my St. Augustine, my Floritam is not doing well. I'm having to water that all the time, and stuff like that. I need that water, right? Like that's, or when you're agricultural, as these people are, it's life or death. Because if the waters do not come, you're into famine and you're into bad times, right? So this Baal is this god of the water. Okay, history's done. Let's talk about Ahab. So Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more so than anyone else. Here's my hot take on Ahab. I don't think he woke up in the morning with like a scar down the side of his face, like Dr. Evil, and went, I am going to be the most evil king that ever was, right? I'm going to throw aside God, Yahweh. I'm going to bring in all of these other ones. I'm going to extort 1 million talents from all these people. I appreciate the 2 people laughing at the Bible joke, right? Like that's, and people are like, what is he doing? It's a very famous movie that's 25 years old now. You should probably watch it. It's called Austin Powers. The people are like, no, I've seen that. Good. That means it just wasn't funny. I don't feel good about myself then. But that's, I don't think he just woke up one day and was like, I'm going to be a bad king, right? I think he's trying to do the best job that he knows how, right? And so he's trying to do what he can. But here's the problem. He didn't get rid of Yahweh worship. But this Baal worship started to move in. And what was probably happening was the people in the region were already worshiping that God. And not because they were done with God Yahweh, the God that took their people out of Egypt and all those things, but it's like, well, all these people, they worship Baal, and it tends to rain on them. Why don't we just throw that into the prayer mix a little bit? We'll dust in a little Baal worship while we're at it, right? We'll just dust that in and see how it goes. And more and more and more. Then all of a sudden you have a special temple sitting right next to your other temple for God Yahweh, to this whole other God. You see what we're talking about here? Because I think sometimes we look back and we go, how in the world could they go after these other gods? Didn't they know about God? These people in the ancient world, they're so dense. I just don't understand how they could follow after these other gods. All the while, we're get on our hands and knees. Please, God, let the Seahawks get to the Super Bowl. Right? That wasn't my joke, by the way. I could care less about football. But we do it all the time. I mean, shoot, it's election year, right? We're election years, and we're like, oh my gosh, we start looking like this is the candidate that's going to save us. This is the one, only he or she can do it. Like that's only that can do it, and we need to get fully behind that one and all that stuff. And we begin to have these in and out groups about it. I mean, only they can save our country. Sounds like a god. Right? And we bow before cable television as we worship. Tell me, oh priest, how I should do my next whatever, you know? It slowly comes in. It comes in. Or you look at your job or your retirement or all these things where you bow before the mighty device that you hold in your hand as you check your stock portfolio every day. You know, like, tell me if I'm going to be able to eat meat tonight or do I need to eat beans again? You know? It's have you, O device of the Dow Jones Index, have you blessed me that I could eat meat or am I back to beans? You know? Like it slowly creeps in just like it did there. O God of wind and storms, are you going to bless it so we can have a great crop? Will I have a blissful retirement or not? You know, we make fun of them, but when you begin to look at it, you're like, oh, I kind of see. You know? In the midst of all that unbelief, of all of that, Elijah comes onto the scene. Elijah comes onto the scene, and this is how it describes him. It says, now Elijah, this is from 1 Kings chapter 17. Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe and in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. This is the first verse. This is how we're introduced to Elijah. And he says all this. So let's break it down. Raise your hand if you know what Tishbite means or Tishbe of Gilead. Do you know where that is? Nobody? Do you never look at a map? Do you know what would happen if you actually looked at a map? It's not there. It's not there. And all the scholars think that it's almost like it's a joke because Elijah literally comes out of nowhere. That nobody knows. These cities are not mentioned anywhere else in all of Scripture. No one knows where these things are. That we're in a situation where Elijah isn't from Yeehaw Junction because Yeehaw Junction's too well known. Too many good things come out of Yeehaw Junction. He's from that town that you blow by on your way to Lakeland that you didn't even know you went through it. Right? Like that is where Elijah is from nowhere. And he comes in when the time seems darkest. God opens up his prophesical people, I guess. And he goes to Ahab and he says to him, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there will be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. Why does dew nor rain matter right there? It's because that's what Baal is. And Elijah's saying, it's not going to even dew. Nothing's going to even get wet on the ground until I say so. Basically saying, your God Baal means nothing here. Nothing. And so how do you think Ahab responded to that? With positivity? Like, oh, that's very interesting what you said here. No, usually when our idolatry is confronted, right? When our idolatry comes together, when someone finally goes, hey, you may want to cool it on the nationalism stuff, or hey, you need to, perhaps your retirement isn't everything in your life, right? You know, perhaps all that, perhaps you're a little bit too much into the grandkids. I don't know. But like that is, whenever you get called on it, you get angry. You get angry, and Ahab flew into a rage, and God told Elijah, you need to get to the wilderness like Moses did, and how I'm going to do Jesus later too. Get to the wilderness. And it says in the wilderness that he went out there, and he was drinking out of a river, and the river dried up, the land became dry, but God took care of his prophet by sending him ravens. Which gets said again with Jesus in the wilderness, is what the gospel lesson was. That's Elijah. So, I have two closing thoughts. It's kind of a weird sermon, I know. But I got two closing thoughts. We got to back up a little bit. Over the next 7 weeks, I want you, through this sermon series, I want you to look for something. Because it seems we're always looking in our own lives for the next mighty prophet from God who's going to come and save us. We're always looking for that. It's like, when will God finally speak again to save us? But I want you to ask yourself some questions during these next 7 weeks and afterwards. Is anything getting better with these two here? Because after these two mighty prophets come and do some simply amazing, unbelievable things, the people of God still go into slavery into Babylon. And we end up not seeing true salvation until the one who is the prophet, priest, and king together, Jesus, comes and saves humanity by dying on a cross and rising again. Look for that. Discuss that. And I want you to discuss what you think that might mean for us today as we look around in the world. We see the same God that sends his son to die on a cross provide for Elijah with these ravens. And he'll provide for us too. So what does all of this mean? Here's the closing. Ahab. We're just like him a lot of times. We're going to go after those false gods, looking for them, thinking that they're going to be finally the thing that gives us hope. If I just get that right political leader in, if I can finally get this right, if I finally, like the stock market just go up another 5% or, whatever, I don't know, then I'll finally be all right. But it isn't true. And it's only going to lead to our wells drying up. And when our wells do indeed dry up, go to the true King, the one that goes into the darkness and the dryness of the cross to give you true life and hope and a well that is so deep that you'll never be thirsty again. For he is Jesus. And does everyone know what Jesus means? It means Yahweh saves. So let him be your Savior because he already is. And that's good news. Let's say a prayer.